As the first quarter of 2025 came to a close, a sweeping new tariff policy hit North America, not from Beijing, but straight from Washington. Steel, EVs, clean tech, a 25% penalty that doubled to 50% in just 90 days. But this time, the reaction wasn't silence. Canada fought back. Mexico negotiated a reprieve. And together, they triggered something bigger than just a trade dispute. It's not just retaliation, it's a North American revolt. This is Trump triggers North America trade revolt. Mexico and Canada pushback. So the question is, what happens when America's neighbors stop following orders and start building their own alliances? Could this mark the real end of U.S. economic dominance in the region? Welcome to Geo Capitalist, where we decode global wealth one power shift at a time. If you're looking for insight behind the headlines, subscribe now. Because what's happening in North America isn't just policy friction, it's a quiet, calculated redrawing of power. As March 2025 unfolded, President Donald Trump reignited a high-stakes trade battle by reimposing steep tariffs on key North American imports. In a move that shocked trade partners, Washington slapped a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, targeting even Canada and Mexico. Then, in June, that rate doubled to 50%. The justification? Protecting American manufacturing, reducing foreign dependency, and putting American workers first. But the real impact wasn't felt in the headlines. It was felt in supply chains, corporate boardrooms, and foreign ministries across the continent. This time, the tariffs weren't just symbolic. They targeted two of America's largest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, even though both countries supply more than half of the U.S.'s metal imports. The shock wasn't just economic, it was strategic, and it triggered immediate diplomatic countermoves. Canada responded through the legal mechanisms of the USMCA, the successor to NAFTA. Prime Minister Mark Carney called the tariffs unjustified and launched formal consultations to challenge the action. Mexico, under newly elected President Claudia Sheinbaum, didn't wait. She personally intervened, securing a 90-day delay on the new tariffs and made it clear that Mexican sovereignty was not up for negotiation. Together, both nations reactivated legal frameworks that Washington may have underestimated. Far from rolling over, they leaned on trade law, diplomacy, and their own supply chains to push back. The world watched, not because a new trade war was trending, but because it revealed something deeper. North America's post-pandemic trade order was fracturing in slow motion, not with declarations, but with disputes. Canada didn't wait to feel the impact. Within 24 hours of the March tariffs, it announced a dollar-for-dollar retaliation, imposing 25% duties on nearly, say, $30 billion worth of U.S. exports. The list was strategic: steel, aluminum, electronics, even recreational goods that affect U.S. states politically aligned with the tariff decision. But it wasn't just about hitting back. It was about making a point. The Canadian government immediately launched a formal challenge under the USMCA framework, citing violations of trade provisions that protect member nations from arbitrary tariff hikes. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc publicly reinforced Canada's position. This wasn't retaliation out of anger. It was response through process. But behind the legal strategy was something even more important: diversification. Canada began shifting more trade toward Europe under its existing agreement with the EU, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA. That move not only reduced dependency on U.S. markets, but also positioned Canada as a more reliable trade partner in a shifting global landscape. What's remarkable is that Canada didn't raise its voice. It raised its leverage. Even as tourism bookings fell and U.S. airlines began slashing flights into major Canadian cities, Ottawa remained composed. The goal wasn't to escalate, it was to outmaneuver. At a time when trade rhetoric globally has become loud, Canada leaned into quiet strategy. It used its treaties, it used its networks, and it reminded Washington that a neighbor is not a subordinate. A question that demands attention. Consider this. Can the courtroom outmaneuver the negotiating table? When a nation abides by the rules yet finds itself punished, does that fracture the global faith in the rule book? or force a rewrite. Mexico's response wasn't reactive, it was strategic. President Claudia Sheinbaum, elected in October 2024 and facing her first major foreign policy test, took a bold stance. Within days of the U.S. tariff announcement, she secured a 90-day delay on the proposed 30% tariff hikes through direct negotiations. But the message was unmistakable. Mexico would not bend under pressure. Instead of simply fighting the tariffs, Mexico accelerated its internal transformation. One of the most significant moves was expanding the Interoceanic Corridor, a massive infrastructure project linking the Atlantic and Pacific coasts through southern Mexico. Designed to rival the Panama Canal in logistics efficiency, the corridor is now on track for full freight operations by 2026. It offers global shippers, especially from Asia, an alternative route that bypasses both U.S. ports and politics. At the same time, Mexico began to tilt its foreign trade focus. During the 2025 BRICS summit in Brazil, Mexico participated as an observer, an unusual move for a historically North America-centered economy. It opened trade dialogues with Brazil, India, and South Africa, signaling a subtle pivot toward a multipolar economic strategy. While Mexico remains firmly embedded in the USMCA, it's also building what many experts call strategic exit ramps. It's not leaving U.S. trade behind, it's creating options. And that shift, while quiet, could have seismic consequences. This isn't the Mexico of previous decades, reactive, dependent, or boxed in. It's assertive, diversified, and increasingly global. And the question Washington now faces is whether tariffs will create leverage or drive its neighbors further away. The biggest miscalculation of all? That Canada and Mexico would respond to Trump's pressure, the way they did in 2018, with caution, negotiation, and eventual compliance. But Prime Minister Mark Carney reversed that playbook. He publicly stated that Canada's alignment with the U.S. was no longer automatic, calling America's unconditional dominance over North America a chapter that's over. He then rallied domestic industries and prepared countermeasures for a scenario where bilateral talks stalled. North America in 2025 is fundamentally different. This isn't 2018. The region has diversified its risk, iterated its diplomacy frameworks under USMCA, and braced for volatility. Instead of tightening their belts, Canada and Mexico activated contingency plans, turning trade friction into strategic leverage. Interpretive claims about sentiment shifts among political elites remain speculative, but the structural shift is clear. When alliance is no longer assumed if partners no longer behave as natural allies, what does leadership truly demand, and how is it earned in practice? Delivered formal retaliation almost immediately. By early March, Ottawa had imposed 25% duties on the $30 billion in U.S. exports, from metals to electricity equipment, targeting politically sensitive products in U.S. swing states. Simultaneously, Canada formally requested USMCA consultations under Chapter 31, challenging the legality of U.S. Section 232 tariffs. These moves weren't driven by emotion, but engineered through institutions. Meanwhile, Mexico secured a 90-day reprieve on proposed 30% tariffs, via a direct call between President Sheinbaum and President Trump, preserving preferential USMCA access for the majority of its exports. On the ground, Mexico advanced its Interoceanic Corridor plan, with rail and port operations phasing into service by late 2025. Mexico also deepened bilateral outreach with Brazil and India following its observer role at the BRICS 2025 summit, quietly redefining its export orientation. Early indicators show the impact. Canadian consumer confidence sank, Mexican FDI slowed, and even chocolate exports grew in both nations as U.S. manufacturers struggled under rising input costs. Europe reacted differently to the tariff storm. European Commission leaders voiced concern, but avoided public escalation. Germany and France opted for soft pushback, working through EU-wide trade adjustments rather than headline drama. Canada and Mexico took a divergent path, Canada invoking USMCA and CETA, Mexico leaning into BRICS Plus alternatives and infrastructure autonomy. This divergence demonstrates a tectonic shift. Geographic proximity meant compliance historically, until now. Canada's calculated disengagement and Mexico's infrastructure turn underscore that allies are no longer guaranteed partners out of convenience. This historic moment challenges assumptions. In an interconnected world, integration is no longer a bet. It's a choice. When distance defies dependency, if closeness no longer guarantees collaboration, how will the very architecture of alliances evolve, and who will redraw the map? The USMCA remains the formal backbone of North American trade, but beneath the paper, unity is visibly cracking. Auto manufacturers now confront pervasive uncertainty, assembly lines that once ran on Canadian aluminum, and Mexican car parts face delays, rising costs, and protest from supply chain managers about tariff risks. Production forecasts are being rewritten, sourcing agreements renegotiated, and just-in-time models abandoned for more cautious approaches. Politically, language is shifting too. Canadian cabinet ministers now openly speak of diversifying away from dependence on U.S. demand. Meanwhile, governors in Mexican manufacturing hubs emphasize the need for constitutional trade shields. Local leaders who once embraced regional integration are now promoting self-reliance in trade agreements. Trade boards report increasing workloads as USMCA dispute panels stretch into backlog, and diplomatic channels that once smoothed disputes now show signs of strain. This is no longer just about tariffs, it's about trust. The question now emerging, is North America still a cooperative union or just an accord on paper? If supply chains buckle under bilateral friction, those production lines that span border checkpoints may pivot toward Asia or Europe instead. Even US CMA consultations reveal the strain. Canada is preparing for a scheduled 2026 review that could renegotiate the agreement entirely. And Mexico is quietly eyeballing strategic partnerships with global blocs like the BRICS. USMCA may survive in form, but in function, it's being transformed. It raises a pressing question. Can a trade bloc survive when trust becomes conditional and not guaranteed? What we're witnessing is more than litigation and retaliation. It's a strategic realignment. Canada and Mexico are not just defending, they're reshaping their economic futures. Mexico is channeling investment into its interoceanic corridor, a freight corridor connecting Pacific and Atlantic ports to bypass U.S. choke points. It signals a long-term commitment to alternative routes that are operational, scalable, and immune to Washington's leverage. At the same time, Canada is deepening its outreach under CETA, while expanding green exports and digital trade partnerships with Europe. Legal systems are being mobilized too. Ottawa and Mexico are both preparing input for the 2026 USMCA review, with officials outlining industry priorities and electoral cycles starting to factor into negotiations. But this is not an angry revolt. It's a measured diversification. Investment flows into auto parts plants in central Mexico, cross-border fintech partnerships with EU firms via Canada, and regional trade forums that bypass U.S. seats of power altogether. Corporate chamber feedback shows executives increasingly valuing trade options outside the U.S., and analysts note that finance ministers across both governments are promoting multipolar strategies. To Washington, this should serve as a pivotal message. Strategic influence now requires diplomacy, not coercion. The dominance by leverage strategy has reached its limits. Instead, calculated partnership and shared influence may become the currency of the hemisphere, a provocation for reflection. As trade alignment becomes less certain, what defines leadership in a North American landscape shaped by interdependence? And when infrastructure supplants influence, who sets the rules? And how long can the legacy paradigm persist? And that's all for today's video. If you found this breakdown valuable, watch our next video. It connects directly to what's unfolding. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us decode these global shifts without compromise. Let us know in the comments, is this the start of a new trade era or just a warning shot? Either way, the world is watching. This was Trump triggers North America trade revolt, Mexico and Canada pushback. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.